Best nonfiction of 2024. Fuck. There you go. Hey, what's up? I just realized I forgot a drink. It's okay, we'll just stay thirsty, whatever. So, at the moment of this recording, I have read this year of 2024, around 140 plus books. According to one of my apps, it's 146, and according to the other, it's like 147. What matters is that 60% of what I've read this year has been non-fiction. And that is a bit surprising. I thought I read much more novels. According to my Storygraph app, I read around 85 nonfiction books, but that includes poetry. First of all, I'm sort of a new nonfiction reader. I think I started reading nonfiction around a couple years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. It was really a time of discovery for me, where I really sort of discovered the genre of memoir, personal narratives, and it was kind of a breakthrough to me when I started reading those things. Reading nonfiction has completely changed the way I read and the way I appreciate books. Had a bit of a weird effect in my fiction reading. It's just been a bit more difficult to sort of appreciate fiction. Like, I still love fiction. It's just a bit more difficult to suspend my disbelief, and that I'm a bit more difficult or harsh with my ratings of fiction. It's just something so raw in pure reality, in real stories. So they say, truth is stranger than fiction, and oh boy, that has been true, at least from my reading experience. So I'm going to talk about my favorite nonfiction books of the year. The kind of nonfiction I like, as I have mentioned, so I love memoir and essay collections. There isn't a lot of memoirs in my top books. There is one, I think, 1 or 2 in there. But if you would kind of distill my nonfiction tastes, or at least for this year, it's either like nature, so books about nature, whether it's like crazy travels or sort of genre-bending nonfiction, books that for me were difficult to categorize. And I love those books that kind of like seep into kind of many genres at the same time, because I don't know, I just find that it makes the read much more interesting. Some nonfiction books that I like are books about science blended with philosophy. So it could be anything. It could be physics, it could be neuroscience, but in the middle there's a sort of reflection, like, what does this say about the meaning of life? Those I find absolutely interesting. And this year I have read one of the most important nonfiction books I have ever read in my life. I'm very excited to talk about it. There is no real ranking of these books, but I did still rank them because it's still a fun exercise, and I would say just pay attention to the top 3. For me, the top 3 in this sort of play ranking that I did are the books that have been so impactful. They literally changed the way I see the world. They also changed the way I live and the way I approach things. They've shook me so much. Let's start with number 13. 13 books, seriously. Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag. Love this book. It's a very tiny book. I read it because this year, well, since last year actually, the year before that, we have all been faced with terrible violence on our smartphones, on social media. The world has been chaotic and shaken in the recent past, and a lot of us may have witnessed things that we would have never witnessed before if it was another time. We would have read about it, but yeah, we have been faced with sort of images regarding the pain of others. And this book really changed the way I judge these, and I let myself be affected by these. It makes you think a lot, and Susan Sontag basically makes a case, I think, against the sort of overuse of images. And she wrote this at the time where social media, I think, wasn't even a thing. One of the examples that I found really interesting and important that she talks about in the book is during the Serbian war against Croatia. There were pictures that were going around in both countries depicting like children victims of the war. And a lot of these pictures, because they look so alike, it's not like an easy case of, racial difference between, one side of the war and the other side of the war. You would see these photos of these kids, and, the Serbs would think that they were Serbian kids, and the Croats would think that they were Croatian kids. and both were so outraged by these photos, and they sort of spurred even more anger. It makes you think a lot about association, about the biases that we have and that we can't control whenever we're faced with practically anything, not just images, but situation. But of course, these are very important matters. I don't want to preach or whatever. I have no position in here. I just think it is important to read these books. This particular essay was very important. And I still think about it. I still mention it, and that's why I think it's important to mention it to you. Number 12, The Unwritten Book by Samantha Hunt. I was introduced to Samantha Hunt through her novel, The Seas, which is cool, a really cool novel. It was one of Maggie Nelson's favorite novels or something. I love Maggie Nelson as an author, and so I was like, I gotta read her. When I stumbled upon, very coincidentally, The Unwritten Book online, I think on Goodreads, I was like, I need that. And the cover is beautiful. But this is a kind of a hybrid sort of story. One of these books that I told you about sort of kind of crossbreeds and defying genres. So it's part memoir, it's part literary criticism, and it's also part fiction. Basically, I think there is a sort of unfinished manuscript in here, which is, I think, the author's father's unfinished manuscript, and she puts sections of it in the book and then adds a commentary, and then in her commentary it's sort of a blend of like her personal musings and narratives and all of that. And there's a beautiful, astounding passage in this book that I love about motherhood, about Samantha Hunt's experience of motherhood. At night, I had a mantra. Patti Smith is a mom. Patti Smith is a mom. Lucy Sante's article, The Mother Courage of Rock, in the New York Review of Books, tracks Patti Smith from the first time Sante heard Smith's name in 1971 through her life as a playwright, poet, painter, lover, rocker. But then Sante herself arrives at a wonderful, deeply stirring, wordless moment in the piece. She writes, in 1980, Smith did the unthinkable. At or near the height of her powers, she married Fred Sonic Smith, late of the MC5, and retired from recording and performance to move to a Detroit suburb and become a housewife and mother. The page drops into white space. What is it Sante means to leave unsaid? The shift from a public artist to a private parent? Or is it something more sinister? Something so awful that we can't say about mothers because there's no one who doesn't have some semblance of one? I already know what people think about moms. Cookie recipes, Halloween costumes, hysteria, laundry, yogurt, kitschy comforts of home, chicken breasts, regular old breasts, frivolousness, pop music, minivans. No one has ever looked at my kids and said, "You made 3 deaths! You must really understand life. I'd like to see that Mother's Day card." The truth of this love I feel for my daughters is that it's so penetrating. It's made a mush of my mind. Perhaps that is clear in the way I don't organize a coherent argument. But my mind, in its mushy maternal state, has an ability to ooze over boundaries, squish into thoughts a more logically solid mind might never even dare to consider. If you have been following me for a while, I have been talking about being a young mother. I have kids, and so it was very validating for me to read this sort of passage. I thought it was just so evocative of my experience, and she sort of contrasts that with the banality of it and the fact that it's so extraordinary but also so ordinary. All right, so a very similar read out of that, number 11, which may not be relevant to a lot of you, I don't know, so I don't want to go too much into it, but it was a very important book for me. It also blends genres. So it's called Motherhood by Lisa Marciano, and it's a Jungian analyst's exploration of motherhood and what motherhood can bring to a person. She does this by adding in the narrative these fairy tales, these fables, which serve as a sort of metaphor for a person's psyche in the Jungian point of view. Each fairy tale contains characters, and each character is sort of one facet of one's psyche. And I really wish I had this book, or I had read this book, like the first even just when I was pregnant, I became a mother for the first time 5 years ago, and I only read this now, and it was beautiful. It was validating, and I kind of already have gone through all the tumultuous ups and downs of like the reckoning of becoming a mother, this sort of transition into a new way of being and way of existence. I had already sort of had a sense of closure, but this added to that. This added to my sense of closure. And also it prepares me to sort of like what I could potentially and probably will go through when my children are older, when they're going through puberty and stuff like that. And even if you're not a mother, I think if you know someone who's a mother, I think this is a beautiful gift. For example, if you're thinking about motherhood, or if you wonder if you're going to be a mother one day and you don't really know and it's not really settled, I do suggest reading this book because it was really nice just to also read about these fairy tales, which I think add a beautiful touch to that. So definitely one of the most important books I've read this year. Number 10, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Saidiya Hartman. This is very innovative. It basically reimagines the lives of Black women just post-slavery. Women that are trying to build their lives and are trying to embrace a different sort of life than what would be expected of them. Not just because they're women, but also because they're Black women. So there's this sort of there's more associated with that. I think the author intended to add speculative elements. She found that there was a lack in the archives, and that these women, like, in a way, were pioneers of a new way of living. It wasn't just, you know, the transition from slavery to being quote unquote free, a free person, but it was also about finding new ways to be in changing world. Women that didn't necessarily want to be bogged down by marriage, women that were wayward, that were just different, that were just, they just were not conventional. It was also fascinating because it was written in exquisite prose, and also I learned a lot about things that I never really considered before. It kind of like stretched out a part of history for me. It made me think more about transitions. It's a powerful meditation on beauty, on agency, and the possibilities of life beyond conventional boundaries. So number 9, I have here, it's with me, I think. Shit, where did it go? Oh, here it is. This one, Art Objects by Janette Winterson, essays on ecstasy and effrontery. Effrontery. I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's a beautiful word. I love this book. This was amazing. I love Janette Winterson. Some of my favorite books are written by her. She has like just sublime prose. She's very poetic. She's very much like a Virginia Woolf of our time, I believe. And sometimes it may be difficult to follow her novels because they're so unconventional, but the prose makes up for it. There's an essay on here about why she writes the way she writes or something like that. And something really resonated with me was that she basically says that for her, the point of stories or writing novels was language. And it's very much reminiscent of Virginia Woolf. And that's why her books are the way they are. If you haven't read any Janette Winterson, I suggest Written on the Body, which is a really beautiful novel, or The Passion, which I think are her most approachable novels in a way. The title is Art Objects, so it's basically about art and about the value of art. It's a defense of art and why we need it in a sort of utilitarian world. She argues for the value of aesthetics. And so she does that by talking about what she likes about writing and reading, so the beauty of language. She writes about the first time that she actually was moved by a work of art. She just writes about all these art objects that are here to enrich our lives and to give our lives meaning and purpose and to elevate them in a way. And writing books is a part of that. So you could also qualify this as a book on writing. It was not primarily on writing, it was a lot about art. So yeah, you should read it. Number 8 is Perseus in the Wind by Freya Stark. Freya Stark is a travel writer from the 20th century. You should not be surprised if you haven't heard about her. I had never heard about her before. I might have completely missed her existence, and I'm very glad I did not. I think she was mentioned in one of Rebecca Solnit's older books, and I thought that I loved that name. I was like, Freya Stark? Who is Freya Stark? And then I saw all the books that she had written, and she has traveled a lot in the Middle East especially, and she wrote a lot of very highly regarded travel books in her time. And I love like sort of old travel books, because it's like, you know, these people have undergone a certain journey in a certain time and place, and they have sort of captured the essence of that time and place, even if they were there as an outsider. And it's kind of like the closest thing that you could get to sort of time traveling in a specific time and place. She does talk about travel, but it's not a travel book. It's more like essays where she writes about childhood and travel and old age and happiness. So I would say it's a very philosophical book, infused with her experience as a traveler. And I admire female travelers so much, even those today that are alive today and doing cool stuff. I admire them even more back, you know, when they were traveling back in the day, where maybe the world was a little bit more hostile to women. I don't know, actually, who knows? I don't know anything. So she draws on her adventures to contemplate these deep topics. So I love that so much, and it's beautifully written. You really have this sense of a different style, a bit of an old-fashioned style, but still very elegant. I think Perseus in the Wind refers to a sort of constellation. She talks about that in the introduction. And this was a book that she had written, I think one of the last books that she had written. She was already pretty old when she wrote it. I think she might have been in her 80s or her 90s or something like that. So it's always very interesting to read what old people, like old wise writers, have to say. The books where I actually learn the most, or that gives me a sort of very enriching perspective on life, are really those sort of, books written by wise old writers, wise old people. Another one of those books that I loved this year was from Oliver Sachs. I think Gratitude were like these 4 essays that he wrote at the end of his life, where he was contemplating being near death and stuff. That was definitely also, was not on my list. I might have not talked about it. I'm glad I did. It's a very tiny thing. It's like 4 very tiny essays. It's a beautiful book. And Oliver Sacks is basically this writer who was like a doctor, and he reported like a lot of odd cases from his patients, and he weaves those medical tales with philosophy. And so it's a very particular kind of genre that I also love. Definitely do check Oliver Sacks out. All right, number 7, John Steinbeck. Unsurprising, John Steinbeck will probably be in all of these top 10s for the coming years that it will take me to read all his books. I have become a total fan. Thank you for all of those of you who recommended John Steinbeck. This is Travels with Charlie. Charlie being a French poodle that John Steinbeck just decides to travel with. He decides to do this whole tour of America with his dog. So it's like a personal travel log, mixed with like insights or questionings he has about what he observes about life, about people who travel, about identity and uprootedness and things like that. And there's also little episodes of his travels where, you know, there's like funny things that happen and funny conversations. I think it's the funniest book I have read this year. He's just a master storyteller. You know what they say, I would read his shopping list at this point. Now, the next 2 books I'm going to talk about, number 6 and number 5. First, number 6. So these books are like very popular books. You may have already read them. You definitely have heard of them. These were the books that are like, okay, I have to read them because I like the genre, but also they were so widely loved and appreciated. I don't know. I feel like there is a reason why some books, at least on Goodreads, are widely highly rated, and I'm often very excited to read those because I'm like, I know this is going to be a good read, and I was not disappointed. Sometimes I'm disappointed, but this one was not disappointing, and that is Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. So Jon Krakauer chronicles the life of a guy, what's his name again? I forgot. Someone McCandless. So he chronicles the life of this guy that is basically, you know, he's born and raised in a sort of very privileged family. He goes to college, all paid for, but he is an idealist. He gets enamored by the words of Thoreau and other writers that talk about a different way of living, that talk about connection with nature. And so Krakauer feels a sort of connection with this character who, eventually died. It's sort of this tragic story where this guy dies in the Alaskan wilderness. And so Krakauer sets out to sort of investigate the life of this guy, and especially the travels of this guy and what happened during that trip, why he died, because a lot of people were very divided in their impressions of him. Some people were like, that is so stupid, he was so unprepared. One of those young idealists that, again, didn't know how to survive in nature. He doesn't even come prepared to live in the Alaskan wilderness, And then there are those who actually, the guy meets on the way, so Krakauer kind of traces them down and interviews them all, and who have been extremely touched by this man and what he wants to set out to do. So he wants to completely disconnect and really have this sort of transcendent experience in nature. Yeah, it was fascinating and also gruesome in a way. Also because there's this photograph of him that he takes of himself just before he dies. And by the way, the fact that he dies is not a spoiler. We just know that from the beginning. But there's a photograph of him that he takes of himself that you can find on the internet. And of course I did find it because I was too curious. And it's so strange. He really has this look about him that is so special. It was haunting. It was really haunting. This is the kind of book that I think I would recommend to everybody in the sense that I feel like different kind of people would appreciate this book. It's just so well written, so well told. If you wanna give a book that for someone you don't really know what their vibe is, I think this one is sort of like a gift for all, a story for all. And so the next one also contains the title Wild. It is, of course, the famous memoir by Cheryl Strayed, Wild, where she decides to hike by foot the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT. But what's unique about this story is that she just did it on a whim. After the death of her mother, she decides to undertake this journey where she's pretty young. I think she's in her early 20s. And you would wonder why you would be so enthralled by this woman walking, just hiking this trail. It's a big book. It's not a small book. It's like a lot of pages where she's undertaking this journey, and you're like, how is this that good? And I wanted to find out. That's why I wanted to read this, because it was on my radar for a long time. And I get it. It's, in a way, it's a masterclass in writing. She really goes through a lot in that trail, and I think you kind of feel for her character. Well, at least, the character that she makes herself to be in her book. This was a wide success, and I understand why. And yeah, I was wrapped. The story was cool. It was a nice adventure. It was so well written. It gave me a lot of insights, but also it was just hugely entertaining. I don't know why, I just couldn't put it down. It was just so thrilling to, I was like, is she gonna make it? How is it gonna happen? Like crazy stuff keep happening. It was just so good. Number 4 is a very slim volume. It is a book by Mary Oliver, who is, I think, one of the author, if not the top author that I have read this year. I've read a lot of her prose and a lot of her poetry this year, and this one was more prose. It is basically this account of her relationship with Molly Malone Cook, who was her partner and who was a photographer. So there are these vignettes of specific aspects of their life together and of their relationship. And in the book, you also have photographs by Molly Malone Cook. She paints a portrait of the difference between her and Molly and how they complemented each other. And I thought this was such a beautiful love story. You can be sure that when a poet writes prose, it's special. And Mary Oliver, all her poems and all her prose never fail to touch the deepest parts of my heart for some reason. It wouldn't be, surprising to cry just by reading one of her poems. And I cried when I read this book. I settled myself in a warm bubble bath last winter. I started reading it and I just read it in one bath sitting in a week in an hour or less. And it was just beautiful. It felt like by reading these words, I could kind of touch through the cosmos and feel their energies. It was just so special. It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful sort of coffee table book. I wouldn't dare say put it in your bathroom or in your toilet. Don't do that. Mary Oliver deserves better. We are entering the territory of the top 3, baby. Top 3. The important ones. Just these ones have specifically sank at the bottom of my heart and lodged themselves there forever. So, no doubt, I will recommend these books like a broken record, especially the first 2. In a way, they're life-changing, I would say, no less. And they just radically changed the way I see things, especially the first one. So, without further ado, let's talk about number 3, The Firmament of Time by Lauren Astley, who has lived between 1907 and 1977. So, of course, one ought to contextualize him because a lot of his writing is about science. I actually read that he was one of the pioneers in sort of popularizing science, or like writings about science, like that kind of genre, and kind of making science accessible to the lay person, the average person. And it's fascinating when you read this book in particular. This one specifically stands the test of time. It's short, it doesn't go into great detail, and the mysteries of the world that he talks about here more from a philosophical lens. I just want to read like the short paragraph here because I find that it's the best description of this book, particularly the last qualifying words to describe it. In this book, Lauren Astley examines what we as a species have become in the late 20th century. His illuminating and accessible discussion is a characteristically skillful and compelling synthesis of hard scientific theory, factual evidence, personal anecdotes, haunting reflection, and poetic prose. Now, I just want to pause. Not too long. Pause on these 2, I wouldn't say adjectives, but just these 2 things. Haunting reflection and poetic prose basically sums up the book. So as you can see, it's not very big. I underline like the whole book. In this book in particular, The Firmament of Time, as you may have guessed, we talk about time. Although no, I don't think he dwells on it too much. The first part is basically the sort of history of scientific achievements. Cornerstones of scientific achievements that have completely changed the trajectory of science. He speaks about Newton in the beginning and Galileo and heliocentrism and things like that. So sort of this brief history of how we perceive the natural order of things. He talks about Darwin, and one of the things that he confronts us with in the very beginning is really this sort of bias that in any given time in human history, we have about the way things work with capitals, and our view of the world, and also our view of its mysteries. It is arguably the most disenchanted time of our human history. He hints at it a lot in this book as well. We are really now in this sort of materialistic, utilitarian world. You still have, of course, the religious and the sects and the whatever, and I'm not here to debate that or talk about that, but he just kind of contextualizes the world and what was sort of prevalent thought before these scientific discoveries have completely changed things. And he also says something really fascinating to me and very pertinent, was the fact that basically however fast things move or discoveries are being made, human lifespans are still kind of short or too short to realize, how far we've gone and to really contextualize our time and things that are specific to our time. I would actually add that maybe it's the first time maybe it's the first time that as a species, since everything has been going arguably much faster than before, that like we're finally able to look back in the past and in our history, and also thanks to writers like Astley and other modern writers like him, that kind of challenge our perception of ourselves as a species and also of what we can make out of the world and out of our perception of the world. I don't know if that makes sense, but this is an inquiry into that. And the second part is, so, basically there's this sort of short history, recontextualizing scientific discoveries, blah, blah. And one of the last parts is how man became natural, how human is man, how natural is natural. I have since ordered a few Astley books because just so good. The writing is just amazing. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, if writing is like the beauty of language is something that for you goes very well with science, things that make you think, this is a great book for that. Number 2, I picked it up to help with my writing because it's called Free Play, Improvisation in Life and Art. So it doesn't say anything about writing. Yeah, I just saw Kathy Redzenbrink endorse this edition. She wrote about writing. I haven't read her books, but I've stumbled upon them a few times. And Forward by Ruth Ozeki. I love her novels and I love her as a writer. So I was very curious to pick this up. And then at the back, you see more very enticing endorsements. One especially by Maria Popova. If you don't know, Maria Popova has a beautiful newsletter online. I discover a lot of authors and works through her newsletter, actually. I think that's where I discovered Astley, another book of his that I discovered on Maria Popova's newsletter, which was The Unexpected Universe. He wrote a lot of books. And yeah, so the fact that she says, a classic, altogether vitalizing, the remedy for creative block and existential stuckness. I was like, all right, I'll get that. And I know Ruth Ozeki is a sort of like Zazen, Zen person. She talks about Zen a lot. I think she wrote about it. And she says that she will be rereading this book and practicing with it for the rest of her life. I was like, shit, man. I mean, who is this? Who is this Steven Nachmanovich? Who is this guy? And it turns out this guy is actually a violinist, artist, that wrote one of the most beautiful, stunning books about life. This is now my new Bible. I have been already recommending it. I recommend it to all creatives out there. All people who make art, who are occasionally stuck, who sometimes stumble. I don't know. It's not even a self-help book, you know? It doesn't really say do this, do that, which is what I love. Improvisation is all about just being in the moment. So it's in a way that has this sort of Buddhist edge or something. It has this, which is, unsurprising that Ruth Ozeki would like this book. It really reminds us that art is very much life, that art is life. I think that's one of the main points of this book. And he reminds us in the very beginning that, you live, like the way you live, your life, like how you are, how you carry yourself, like you are improvising all the fucking time. That's life. And it can be the same with art. And the thing is, if you let go and you improvise in art, you find treasures, you find what is actually in you. There is no more sort of blockages. I think this was a very good reminder, and a reminder that reminded me of these things in the most eloquent way. One thing I loved about it is that it's mixed with his personal experiences as well, with his own art, which is the violin. He actually talks about improvisation in music a lot. There is this sort of universal quality to the way he writes about all sorts of art, reminding us that whatever it is, maybe painting or drawing or writing or playing music, it all comes from sort of this mystical source that kind of springs forth in the moment. And it's only when you stop thinking about it too much and you're not too much in your head that the output is wonderful and transcendent. So it's very, very spiritual, I would say. I feel like if you're an artist, this is the kind of thing that you experience profoundly and something that you feel, something that you're in touch with. Whatever the muse is, that part of you that feels inspired, there's something mysterious about that. And dear Steven has reminded us of this. I would definitely write him fan mail. I've been thinking, should I write fan mail? I should write fan mail to this guy. I should share him this video. I don't know what else to say. Read it and cherish it and pass it along and share it. Now, boy, oh boy. I don't know how to introduce this book because it's a behemoth. It's ginormous, and it's a bit different from the books that I have been talking about. I would say it's a bit more academic. Some of you might know it. I know it's not hugely popular and that it's unfortunately still quite niche. I could talk about this for hours and hours, and I have with people. I have shared the ideas I got from this book, this man. Yeah, it's difficult to talk about because it feels so special and groundbreaking. He has already been compared to Freud or Darwin. The author of this book is Iain McGilchrist. He is a philosopher, literary scholar, or retired psychiatrist as well. He's now an old man, and he talks in a lot of podcasts, not in the most popular ones, but but he's getting out there. They made a book out of this book. They made a book out of this. They made a book out of the book. No, they made a movie. I think they made a documentary out of this book that I will link down below. I don't think you need to read the book if you sort of like stalk every one of his interviews, which I have done. But I find that they have helped my reading of his book, and that both sort of reading and hearing him helped in forming a sort of coherence and in making me understand this a little bit deeper. But I do feel that I need to reread it. So I first want to thank my friend Alex. Alex, if you're watching this, thank you. Alex recommended this book to me, saying just very casually, like, this book really changed the way I see things. And I was like, what do you mean? And so I looked it up and I was like, okay, cutting edge neuroscience, what that says about the human brain. What can that say about life, about the meaning of life, about reality, about existence? You'll never really know the true nature of existence, but to come close to the nature of existence, or to like some sort of accurate speculation about the nature of existence, you must understand the human brain. I have a problem with people that are so certain of, you know, they have a thesis about what reality is or whatever, what consciousness, like the big questions, which Iain McGilchrist tackles with this book. And I have an issue with people who are like so certain of it, like materialists, for example. That's like my personal opinion, obviously, but I just feel like, I don't know, how can you be so arrogant? We need to have the humility to realize the limits of our cognition, because of course, there are limits to our cognition. I am going to talk about the book now because maybe I'll start rambling again. The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. In this title, he's referring to, I think, a story in Nietzsche about a master and his emissary. And he compares the brain to this. So in the brain, there are two hemispheres, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. And in his thesis, he posits that the right hemisphere should be the master. It's the one who understands more, who sort of understands the big picture. And the left hemisphere is, you know, in charge of language, and it's in charge of analytical thinking. It's much more focused on parts. These two hemispheres have very different ways of being and of functioning. And he claims, of course, that it's not like, you know, you need both for everything. You need the functioning of both. But he claims that in the modern world, at least in the Western world, we have arrived at this point where left hemisphere thinking has gained some sort of prevalence and power over right hemisphere thinking. I don't know, he just shone the light on so many things, and I will, definitely reread this. You are not sure you want to read something this huge. Although, just to, soothe people that have big book fear, which I've had, but now I feel I have it less. But anyway, this part is all notes. So that's crazy. Like, it's so rigorous. 3,000 studies. It took him like 20 years to write this book. So if you're not sure if you want to tackle something like this, I would suggest reading this little booklet, Ways of Attending How Our Divided Brain Constructs the World. It's sort of an introduction, let's say, to the deeper explorations of this one. Here he really claims like the way you attend to things, what you pay attention to changes what you perceive. Okay, I have this really cool analogy actually. My partner and I have noticed that because we drive a Volkswagen multivan, we never paid attention to these kind of vehicles before. Because it wasn't in our mind. But ever since we have one, we see them everywhere, like literally see them everywhere. So now we see them everywhere, but we didn't before. But does that mean that there were none before? No, obviously not. And so this guy is answering my deepest questions in the most satisfying way, which of course still leaves place for mysteries and questions, and even more questions. Definitely so important, this book. I do secretly hope that more and more people are going to talk about it or share the documentary, whatever. I haven't seen the documentary, actually. I really want to see it, but just like I can't shut up about it. Can't shut up about it. It's so good. Anyway, talking about the meaning of life and existence and all of that, I have started a Substack. Actually, I've had a Substack for a while, where I didn't write much. I love writing. I just kind of was like, it's an online journal, whatever. And I don't know. I've written a few really long form essays, and I'm just like, every time I do read on my phone, I I don't want to, read such long things on my phone. So if you want book recommendations, I'm going to write about the stuff that I read. So you're going to get more info about what I read much sooner than if I would talk about them or publish them in videos. And I want to deliver sort of bite-sized, like 1 or 2 paragraph, sort of a newsletter, essay-like things, writings, musings, whatever, poetry, the meaning of life, findings, travel, thoughts on parenting, thoughts on life, and things like that. I want to share all these things in another format than these videos. So I invite you to subscribe if you want. I will link all the links below. And you can find all my social media shit as well. Let me know what your favorite nonfiction books of the year are. I'm super excited to learn more. You know my thing now, you know my vibe, you know what I like. But I'm still a very wide reader, so just give me your suggestions and I'm gonna be very excited to look into them. I will say goodbye now. And thank you for listening or watching this very long video. I don't know what kind of accent that is. I just think I'm losing my mind because I haven't drank water in like an hour. See ya!